Hi guys, welcome to our first lesson on our new unit. So this unit is going to be looking at uh, what's called the Gaelic revival. So we're looking at a bit of cultural and social history here. Eh, that's based around the late 1800s and late 19th century, so around the 1880s, 1890s up into the start of the 20th century. This is a very important aspect of Irish history and links in very much with the next unit we're going to be looking at, which is the early 1900s, when we're looking at the 1916 Rising, the War of Independence, the Civil War, and that physical force tradition. A lot of this comes from what's inspired by the Gaelic revival. Now, they're not directly causal of each other, but definitely there is an overlap in the people who are involved in the two, and the people who are involved in the Gaelic revival become very, very important in influencing Irish history, really from the 1880s onwards, or 1870s, 1880s onwards, through the rest of up to the modern day. Okay, so today to start off with, there's going to be quite a lot of feudal thinking tasks in today's lesson, where I'm just asking you to really consider a few things. Start off with what I want to do is just think about these questions on the screen. So, what do you think it means to be Irish? What makes the Irish unique in our own way? And what culture or traditions do the Irish have that is important to our identity? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to pause here for a minute or two and really think about these three questions, because it's important to have a good insight, a good personal opinion on these questions for this unit. Okay, so hopefully you've come up with a few answers in your head. Some things you might think about in terms of what it means to be Irish. You might think about the language. You might think about Irish dancing, Irish sports, Irish music. We might think about the landscape. We might think about the history. We might even think about specific things such as 1916 or the Troubles. We might think about religion. There's lots and lots of things that come up when we think about what it means to be Irish. Okay. For today, what we really want to do is go into a bit more detail in this topic. So, what does it mean to be Irish? We want to think about the different aspects of our culture and which are important to us as people, and think about this on a personal level. What individually is important to you about being Irish, or if you're not Irish, that's you're someone who is experiencing Irish culture, living in Ireland. Perhaps as a what is your view of Irish culture? Okay? And then we want to understand what is meant by the Gaelic revival. So, the main task for today that I'm going to be asking you to do, I'm going to explain this in a bit of detail here, is just to consider what it is to be Irish. So, as you can read, what I said here is when we're studying Irish history, we spend a lot of time learning about people fighting for Irish nationalism. Okay, a huge amount of our time is spent looking at this. Right, when we think about 1798, the rebellion there to try and get Irish political freedom for the Irish nation. When we look at O'Connell's fight for the rights of the Irish people, when we look at Parnell and his fight for home rule, and when we move into looking at 1960 and the War of Independence, all of this is looking at Irish nationalism. And of course, this is also coming up later on next year when we look at the Troubles. Irish nationalism, this idea comes across throughout our history. It keeps coming up. All right, people are looking for Irish freedom and to have an independent identity for Ireland. But really, what does this mean? Okay, we use these terms a lot. We say this a lot. It's important for Irish to be Irish, important to Irish to have freedom. You need to have a good understanding of what that means. What are you talking about when you talk about it's important to be Irish? It's important for the Irish people. Okay, what makes us different to Great Britain, which had so much power in this on this island for so long? What was the big problem here? Why did we crave independence so much? What was it about Irish identity that we were wanting to express that maybe we weren't being allowed to express? Okay, so some of the things that people, there's loads of things that are popping up there. Some of the symbols we might connect with Ireland, a harp, it's on all of our money, it's on our passports, very much a the national symbol of the country. Is that important to being Irish? The shamrock, very much a symbol of Ireland, connected with St. Patrick's Day. We have the leprechaun there. Okay, all really, symbols that are used to represent this country. Are these important though? Are these important things to being Irish? When you say you're Irish, are you connecting yourself with any of these symbols? Okay, is that something that you think, okay, Ireland wouldn't be Ireland if we got rid of any of those? They're kind of the more symbolic ones. Okay? But there's lots of other things in there as well. We see the language. Is Irish language very important to us? Okay? Does that shape who we are? Does that shape what it is to be Irish? Not saying that you have to speak the language fluently, but the fact that we have our own language, is that very important? We have Irish dancing down here. Is that an important aspect? Okay? Many of you may have done Irish dancing as when you were younger, or maybe still do. Is that an important part of what it is to be Irish? We had things like river dance, which was really, really famous and back in the 90s and up to the modern day. Is that an important aspect of Irish? Irish music. We could have traditional music represented here, you have the barron, you have the fiddle, but we also have much more modern music. We have very famous bands. We have people like Hosier. We have U2. We have, I'm struggling, I can't think of many off the top of my head, but you know what I'm talking about. There's lots of Irish bands out there. Is that important? Are the buildings important? The GPO down here and the history involved in those buildings, things like the Rising, is that important to being Irish? Irish sports, right? Is the landscape important? Up here at the top we have the Celtic cross, we have Celtic art represented there, the Celtic history. Are the Celts actually important? We talk about Ireland's Celtic culture. Are the Celts, you may have learned a little bit about them in first year. Is that an important aspect of what we are nowadays? We have some of the great writers here represented. So we have people like Seamus Heaney, we have W.B. Yeats, we have Oscar Wilde. Are these writers, is that an important part of being Irish? Okay. Now that's just some examples of some things. For you guys, it might be something completely different. Okay, but what I want you to do is take a while to actually think about this. I want to come up with 3 things that when people talk about Ireland and people talk about being Irish, what things come to your mind? Right? What is it that's important? Is it the history? Is it the language? Is it certain aspects of culture? Is it a way of being? What makes Ireland unique and Irish people unique in their own right? Now, some of you may be very, very involved with Irish culture. That's brilliant. Some of you maybe are not as familiar with Irish culture. But what to you, like if you didn't grow up in Ireland, if you're recently moved to Ireland or your family's not, hasn't been living here long, that's perfectly fine. What is your international perspective of Ireland? Okay. If you moved here from a different country and people said, "Oh, you're moving to Ireland," what did you think? What were the things that came to mind? It actually could be very interesting and very really insightful to hear what some of our international students might think of this. Okay, so I want you to tell me 3 things that come to mind when we talk about being Irish, about Irish identity, and then explain just a few sentences. Okay, I'm not looking for big pages or anything here. A few sentences for each of them. Why is that an important aspect of being Irish? Okay, so that's going to be the main task for today. So I'm going to suggest you pause here and spend about good 10 to 15 minutes thinking and writing about that task before we move on with the video. Okay, so I'm hoping that all of you come up with a few ideas here, okay? And you're going to submit that work to me on Teams, okay? But really, this is about you thinking yourselves, okay? This is about you coming to your own understanding. I can't tell you what it means to be Irish for you, okay? I know for me what's important. For me, things like the literature is really, really important, okay? As a English teacher as well as a history teacher, people like Yeats, people like Heaney, people like Beckett and Shaw and Wilde, these great writers are very much something that I connect with Irish identity. Also, the landscape, I love going out in nature and I love the Irish landscape. That's very, very important to me. But then if we ask some of the other teachers, like Andrew and Sarah, would definitely connect Irish language and Irish music, I would expect. Okay. I know Andrew, as an Irish music teacher, I'd say he would both jump at those two as being very important to him. Okay. So for each of us, it can be quite individual, but there's definitely something there about being Irish. And I want you to just have your own ideas about this. Okay, so do submit it to me, but this is a personal response more than anything else. Okay, so I hope you've had a bit of a think about that and come up with some good, insightful answers for you as personally. Okay, The reason I'm asking you to do this is that this is what was happening in the 1880s, or the late 1800s, sorry, 1870s onwards. We had people asking this question: what does it mean to be Irish? Okay, and this, they felt, for a lot of people at the time, they felt that what they considered being Irish was starting to fall away. They were starting to lose their identity. Okay, so task 2 is going to be to answer these 3 questions. So I'm going to have to talk about this for a few minutes, and I want you to also read the first page of the booklet before you answer these questions. Okay, so it's really important to just have a good understanding of what was going on at the time, the feeling that people were experiencing at the time. Okay, so essentially we talked about in the famine times that after the famine, the Irish life had changed quite a lot. The courtier class had pretty much been almost wiped out. Emigration had been extreme. The country had lost a huge amount of its population. And when we looked at that documentary before the Christmas break, there was a line that stood out to me. One of the historians said that the joy and the noise of Ireland was gone. Right? The West had always been a place of a lot of noise, a lot of talking, a lot of chatter, and that noise was gone. It was somewhere that was becoming quite silent. Okay, so the world in Ireland is changing very significantly at this time. Not only are is the place becoming quieter, but we've talked about how Irish language was in a severe decline. People started to think that English was a more useful language to them, especially if they're going to have to emigrate out of the country to somewhere like the UK, America, or Canada, or Australia. To have English as their spoken language would be a huge step. So the Irish language declined hugely. At the same time, Irish sports were suffering, and English sports like soccer, rugby, tennis, cricket were becoming much more popular. Okay, and all aspects of Irish culture were really in decline. Some people found this to be a very difficult situation to deal with, and they set about trying to rectify the situation and trying to keep Irish culture alive. And this is what we talk about when we're talking about the Gaelic revival. The Gaelic revival is trying to keep Irish Gaelic culture going. Okay? As it was slowly starting to slip away, people took steps and said, no, we're not losing our culture. And we're very, very successful in terms of bringing it back. Okay? And over the course of the next week or two, we're going to be looking at some of these movements that were taken place in order to save Irish culture and save Irish identity. Okay, so that's the general feeling of what was happening at the time. Okay, now, as I said, I want you to read the first page of that booklet that was attached and have a think about this in the context of what we've talked about in terms of the famine. We've learned a lot about some of these topics already. So what happened to Irish culture during the 1800s? What happened to the Irish language in the 1800s? And what major event of the 1800s further enhanced this problem? Okay, and so when you completed those questions, you want to take a picture of them as well. So task 1 and task 2, you want to picture them, and they're both going to be submitted to me on Teams. Okay, that's everything for today. So today was mainly just to get our head around what the feeling of the late 1800s was in Ireland and the importance of Irish identity. Okay, if you have any questions about the work, guys, please do drop me an email.